Hey folks, Sebastian from Magical here. Quick video today. I just wanted to go over something I get asked about quite often. As you may know, I'm making a game called Traction Point as a solo indie developer, and the question I get asked a lot is, why do I use so many programming languages for the project? I get this question on live streams, YouTube comments, on Discord, and so on. And some of you ask me, why not just stick to one language? Some of you ask me, why do I use like 10 different languages, which is obviously not true. But in this video I'll show you how I use different languages and why, and compare the project to the industry standard, if you will. So as a quick primer for those of you who aren't familiar with the project, we're talking about C++, C#, Zig, and AngelScript. And these are the four programming languages used to make Traction Point, if we don't count some of the visual scripting solutions some of the tools use, but right now I'm not counting those. And if you want to know even more, I made a video some time ago called The Anatomy of My Game Engine, which is a pretty good companion video to this one. Link below. So even though I'm making Traction Point as a solo dev, the project is structured much like a larger project. Some indies prefer to write everything in the same language, hard-coding game logic directly into the executable and keeping the project very lean and mean. And of course, I'm not saying one is better than the other here. For certain projects, lean and mean is definitely the way to go. But that's not really how I work. Partly because I'm used to working on larger projects, sometimes with tens or even hundreds of team members, but also because my game engine basis kind of wants me to be a bit more structured. And finally, because it makes certain things like modding easier later on. But what this means in practice is that the project can be split up into a few distinct areas or parts. But the splitting can be done in a few different ways, depending on how you look at it. So first off, we can split it into the runtime and the tools side. The runtime being mostly C++, and the tools being mostly C#. This is probably not surprising to anyone. C++ is a very powerful, performant language with a lot of ready-made, ready-to-be-used libraries like PhysX, which I use for physics simulation. While C# is much more geared towards rapid application development, also has a very large ecosystem of libraries and a very good standard library for doing almost anything. And this is very much the industry standard, especially if you are a game studio making your own tech. If you're an Unreal house, you might use C++ and Blueprints instead. And if you're a Unity house, perhaps you're writing C# for everything. But many studios making their own tech use the C++ C# pair of languages like this. Another way that we can split up the project is into code and data. And here we're talking specifically about logic. So logic in code versus logic in data. The data obviously contains a lot of other stuff too, like sound effects, 3D models, textures, etc. But if we're talking specifically about logic, the code is mostly C++, while the logic in data is using a scripting language called AngelScript. This could be something else like a Lua or any of the other readily available scripting languages out there, but AngelScript has been integrated into Basis for a very long time. So why do I do this? Well, if you consider a mission or quest in a game, it might contain logic very specific to that quest. And typically we want to keep this kind of ad hoc code separate from the very systemic code of the main executable. Tim Kaine, the creator of the original Fallout game, actually has a great video on this topic called Code the Rules, Script the Exceptions. A link below. But anyway, if we split the logic into what is loaded from the exe or the DLL files, which would be the code side, or the resource packs, which would be the data side, we split the code into C++ and AngelScript parts. And so far everything here has been pretty standard for a game project, but we can split the project in one more way, into the game and the engine, and this is where it gets a little more unusual. For Traction Point, the game code is written in Zig, which brings a fourth language into the mix. But what does it mean that the game code is in Zig? Well, the engine is still in C++, and so things like playing back a sound effect by loading the wave file, sending the samples to the sound hardware, and all of that, that's still C++. But the code that triggers the sound effect to be played in the first place is in Zig, for example because an AI companion in the game says something. The big question for a lot of you seems to be why? Why use Zig for the game when I could just have used C++? And indeed I could have. The game engine obviously supports C++ games as well, since it is written in C++ itself, and the previous incarnation of the game was written in C++. But the thing is, I've written C++ for a long time, over 20 years at this point, and I wanted to try something new. So I experimented with exposing the gameplay layers to Zig, and it turned out pretty well. So in the end, it's just a way for me to make the experience of writing gameplay code a bit more fresh. Zig being a more modern language also allows working in an arguably more ergonomic way, but let's not get into that here. If you have any more questions about this, feel free to ask me during the next live stream or on Discord. If this still seems weird, consider a Unity-based game, where the game is written in C#, but the engine is C++. We have essentially the exact same thing here, except my game is written in Zig instead of C#. So hopefully that answers the question of why so many languages in an easy to understand way. If you want to play an early version of Traction Point, join the Discord to play the pre-alphas. There's a link to the Discord below. And if you would like to create your own mods for the game, stay tuned for the modding SDK to be released later this year. As always, like, subscribe, do all the YouTube jazz, and I'll see you next time.